Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CCB Connect and Share CyberTips webinar. My name is Clara Gurlitt, and I'm an analyst at the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium. Today, we want to focus on a topic, and that is how to prepare for a cyber incident. It's a pretty vast subject, so today we're only focusing on one aspect, and that is playbooks. If you have ever been faced with a serious cyber incident, you know how stressful it can be. And having a playbook with clear directions about which steps to take when you are in the line of fire can really be life-saving for the whole team. But building a playbook can seem a little daunting at times. So to help us clarify what a playbook is and what it isn't, but also what it contains, and probably most importantly, how to build it, I'm very excited to welcome Jeroen Hoof. Jeroen is an expert security analyst and an instructor with the SANS Institute. Welcome, Jeroen.
Hi, Clara. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me on the webinar. I'm quite looking forward to the topic and sharing some thoughts, tips, and tricks on creating playbooks.
Thanks, Jeroen, for taking the time to come here today. So I'm really excited because, as I mentioned, it's a topic that we hear about and it comes up regularly in suggestions, and it's finally happening. So to get us started on this topic, I first want to start clarifying some terminology with you. I've seen many different terms popping here and there. So to make this all clear, what is a playbook actually?
Well, good question. Instead of just answering what is a playbook, I think it's important to make sure that we're talking about the same terminology for a few different levels. As you can see on the slide here as well, at first we have a policy, strategic document, think data protection policy, password policy. It's often quite closely linked to regulations. Then if you go one level deeper, we're talking about a plan. A plan, such as an incident response plan, describes the process of how do you want to obtain a certain goal. In terms of incident response, it's often the document that will describe who does what, who has which responsibilities, but it's applicable, or it should be applicable, to each specific scenario. So it's like the broad document that every company should have. When we're talking about playbooks, we're looking at scenario-specific implementations for that plan. It will describe, for instance, for phishing or for business email compromise, what do you need to do in that specific scenario? Because the plan will often contain steps that are maybe too broad or not specific for that specific scenario. And then if you go one level deeper, we have the optional work instructions where they explain how exactly you need to do this. For instance, if you're talking about isolating a user, which you can do in a phishing scenario or maybe even in any other playbook where a user can get compromised. The steps on how to do it, which button to click, which commands to enter, that would be your work instruction. They're often tied together. One playbook contains the work instructions as well, but some companies try to split them out separately just for clarity.
Okay, so I know that when we first started talking together, I found it difficult to distinguish between a detailed playbook and
Mhm.
a work instruction. So one example, I'm not sure if it's good, that I thought was helpful was, having friends over for dinner. Your plan, guessing would be you serve an entree, a main dish, dessert, and also serve drinks. Um, if your playbook would be an invitation in the summer, then it's going to be barbecue. If it's the winter, you're going to have melted cheese somewhere. Would that be a good analogy, or am I completely wrong here?
No, it perfectly fits, and you can even make it a bit broader and a bit more concrete. The plan, whether you go on a restaurant or you eat at home, it stays the same, right? You have a drink, you have your entree, you have everything that you mentioned. But I'm pretty sure you know the show Culminating, where like everybody who tries to prepare their own dish, and they always have this written out steps with what to do. You can consider the menu. We're going to serve this dish with high level instructions on how you make it. That would be your playbook. And then the work instruction is literally you need to preheat your oven. You need to press this button, put it on that temperature, then press that button. But preheating the oven is not specific to that one dish. You do that for multiple dishes. So that's why splitting off a work instruction can be useful because it's a repeatable step, a technical step that you need to do in different scenarios. However, a lot of companies just keep those within the playbook, within that list that you have. I need to make this dish, it is these steps, and I need to do it in that way. That's perfectly fine as well. It's really just what works for you, which is going to be my punchline for this entire webinar, I think.
That's good to know. I know what to expect now. Um, in the chat now, we're going to be putting a question on what is the playbook that you most want to hear about. So you can choose between ransomware, business email compromise, and data leak. And we're going to try to use examples today based on the scenario that has the most votes. So do try to keep voting and see what it is so that we can see what is the most relevant for you. Um, back to you, Jeroen. I'm sort of imagining that there's a chunk of people from the audience that doesn't necessarily have a playbook, or rather, plural playbooks. So, how would you go about getting a playbook? Do you just build it off your incident response plan?
Well, if you're lucky enough to have an instant response plan, yes, definitely. That's the mature approach, so to speak, where you first have that general plan that matches for all the different scenarios, and then you have a scenario-specific implementation. You make the playbook. It's actually the easiest way to make it. You have a plan, you have to test your plan anyway. So you do a tabletop exercise, you do it for one specific scenario, and then the result of that tabletop exercise that you can make, or you can use that result to start making your playbook specifically for that scenario. However, what if you don't have that plan? Right? The majority of the organizations, I think, nowadays still don't have an incident response plan or not a fully developed one. So you don't need to start with an IR plan. There's also this approach that I would like to call the pragmatic approach, where let's say you don't have an incident response plan, but you do have at least a core team of people that should respond to an incident. You get them together, you get one person who preferably handled that type of incident before, and you get one person who can do the translation IT to management. Because we have the classic IT talk versus management talk, and the playbooks IR plans needs to sit in that in-between level. You walk them through a scenario. You pick a scenario that you think is relevant, and you just start walking through how would you respond and write down everything there. That's your initial draft, but it will be missing structure. So to get that structure, you need to look at certain frameworks. There are a few industry accepted incident response frameworks. You've got the NIST frameworks. You've got a few from SANS. Have that framework, have that structure, and map your response to that structure. That will probably already be a pretty good outline of what you need to do. However, you will be forgetting things. And the things that you'll be forgetting is like the critical questions. I like to call them the dumb questions. Whenever I do these exercises with companies, the first thing they say is, oh, we have this kind of incident. I'm going to go get my documentation on what to do. Okay, so where is it stored? Hey, it's on SharePoint. Well, but in this specific incident type, for instance, with a ransomware, your SharePoint is no longer available. So what do you do? And those are the critical questions where you typically need a third party to do so. So once you have that draft, I would advise get an expert involved, somebody who has experience with making those playbooks, and help them polish or have them help you polish that draft into a structured work that's actually applicable. Because reviewing your own work is actually close to impossible. And then there's a third approach that you can try to integrate. In the resources, you'll see an AI prompt that we have there, which you can use to try to generate a draft playbook. It's quite technical as well. It's not perfect. It's a base of experience that you can try to use. You have to modify it maybe a little bit, but you can use AI to generate that initial draft for you as well. So pick
So there's
whichever works
different
best.
ways. So there's basically different ways that you can go about this. But what I'm hearing from you is that the bulk of the work should be done by the team. And that's based on how basically you would be handling that kind of incident. And the third party then comes later. Um, Two questions here though. When do you call that person in? And another $1 million question, how do you choose the right third party for you?
So the when do you call that person in? I can give some guidelines there. Who do you call? That's indeed the $1 million question, right? Who is the best person to do this for you? The when. So you don't need to do something yourself first. You can perfectly go to your third party and have them start directly for you. The thing is though, whenever I do that, my first meeting with you will be a training on what exactly is a playbook, what should be in there, what's a framework, what framework do you want to use. You can do all of that by yourself. You can do that initial understanding of what is this topic about before making the playbook or before getting that third party. So that initial understanding you can do yourself. The process that I mentioned, go through what would you do already within your specific environment. That's something you can do before getting the third party in there. As soon as you have an understanding of what to do, if you have that initial response maybe tied to a framework, I'd say if you already have that before getting a third party, you're in a very well spot to get external counsel. The who do you call? There's some guidelines there that I really want to touch on. Get someone who tries to understand your environment and don't just copy paste an external template. A lot of third parties that do this for you, they will have templates available, but the resulting document needs to be a document that you can use within your organization. It needs to match your way of working. You will know your internal situation best every time. So make sure that it's somebody that listens to you, that understand your needs and that's willing to modify the template to your needs and not just say, here, this is the playbook. If one day after starting the assignment, they come up with a full playbook, it's probably just a copy paste template and you will need to still modify it to your environment. Look for someone who helps you do that. I think that's the best advice I can give there.
But that's really valuable advice as well. Maybe something that we don't necessarily, we might be, focusing on just having an answer right away and not necessarily making sure that it actually works and is usable in the long run. I see that people voted and that ransomware has won the most votes. So we're going to try to focus our examples on this particular scenario. Talking about scenarios, I have another $1 million question, Jeroen. Sorry about that. How many different scenarios should you build a playbook for?
Well, I get where the question is coming from. However, I don't like to focus on how many do you need to have. Because the thing is, choose quality over quantity, and one is better than none, right? So the first thing is make sure you start with having one. And which one you choose, well, depends. Either you take the one with the most impact, being ransomware in this case, or the one that happens most often, being a business email compromise. Um, and if you have that one playbook, make sure it's tested, it's fully developed, it's maintained. Um, for instance, or for clarification, if you have one playbook, by the time that you test it with every stakeholder involved, you will probably need to do multiple iterations of tests. And it will, at least if I do it for customers, it often takes up ending 3 to 6 months to fully test and implement and integrate, make sure everybody uses it, knows it. There's no more to-dos in there. Everybody knows their role. Because I've had the other way as well, where I develop a full playbook with only the core team. I end up with a presentation on, look, this is what we're going to do. And half of the people in the room didn't even know that their name was in there. And you don't want that as an end result. So make sure it's quality, make sure it's tested. And if you do want to have an indication on how many, I think as soon as you have 3 to 5 playbooks for the most common or most severe incident, that's already quite a lot because you need to maintain them. If you have more than 5, you'll probably need to have quite a mature organization to be able to maintain that level of playbooks because it's important that what's in there is still up to date and you know how to use it, if that makes sense.
It does. I do. So what I'm getting from this is uh, a high impact scenario is not the same as the most often. So we kind of need to think about strategically where do we want to start with the first playbook if we don't have one. Um, and that the other is that we need to train it and update it. But that involves not just our own core team, who's really the head inside those incidents every day, but we might have impact on other teams as well, and they also need to be informed. All right. But also testing can take up to 6 months. So that's also something to take into consideration. I didn't quite realize it would take as long just for one. And that just sort of got me thinking, is if we have max 3 to 5 scenarios, how specific should each scenario be? So, for instance, we're talking about ransomware. If we have one playbook for ransomware, does it have to be one for ransomware with encryption and a different one for catching ransomware once data have been exfiltrated, but it hasn't been encryption yet? How would you go about that?
I wouldn't make that far of a distinction, to be honest. Because if you do that, you can even do what about it's a phishing, but we know that the techniques used are from a threat actor whose end goal is ransomware. Or what if you detect the attack when there's a remote management tool installed that you will know probably will lead to ransomware? And if you have that many level of nuances, there's a risk where you spend a lot of time discussing which playbook do we need to use instead of actually responding to the incident, which completely negates the upside of having a playbook. So what I typically like to do is I try to group them based on the attack vector. For instance, in this case, ransomware. And where you detect it along the kill chain is will depend on how you respond to it, and it will have be different nuances in the different steps in your playbook. For instance, your containment, if there's the initial phishing, or if there's already a widespread and there's multiple hosts already impact, or if you identified there's already a folder for data exfil stage ready to exfiltrate. These are all different steps within that same process with different nuances. That being said, once you make a playbook, and the ransomware one can get really complex if you make it detailed. This is a bit of a daunting playbook to start out with, to be honest. But once you have that level of detail, it might be that you identify certain pivot points where you say, hey, from here on onwards, we're actually making two different processes side by side. then it might make sense to split off the playbook into a separate playbook. I wouldn't start out doing it that way, but depending on how deep and how technical you go with that playbook, it might make sense to split it off at a certain pivot point. Um, but make sure it doesn't end up with discussions on which playbook do you now need to use, because things escalate. That phishing playbook might escalate to a ransomware playbook, which is
That's a
still
really
what we see a lot of times.
sorry, that's a really fair point. It is a living document, and we need to make sure that there are no discussions about which one do we actually pick. So we'll agree on that one. Talking about a living document there, and how to go about doing things, make it usable. Is there a specific format that you would recommend for your playbook?
Well, use what works best for your organization. But that's a classic example, the classic answer. But yes, there are. There's mainly three different ways that we represent the playbook, where the first one is the visual flowchart. It's the visual representation of the decision tree, the Visio, the Draw.io, whichever you want to use. You can even make it a poster size format, put it on the wall, and it will give you the high level steps to take with some key decision points and some key things to take into account. However, in that format, there's no space to write out how do you need to do it or a very detailed steps or more guidelines. So the second document that you definitely need is a written out playbook. The full example, fully written out, which if you've never done that type of incident before, that's a document that you can follow because it should describe most, if not all, of the steps that you need to take. Then there's a third version, the what I like to call the practical version, which often is a checklist. It's this step needs to be taken with maybe it's a bit in between the visual flowchart and the fully described one. It has that high level step, it has a few details, but there's also a very big risk to using checklists. It's nice because you can check off, I did this step, I did now this, do this step, and I didn't forget anything, but it makes you think that an incident is linear. And with the latest updates to the incident response frameworks, we try to emphasize that incidents are not linear. That containment step that you did for that one server, there's a pretty big chance you'll need to do a different containment step for a different server somewhere along the line. Or that scoping exercise that you did where you try to identify all the endpoints that were impacted, well, you'll need to do that a few times. And based on your findings along the road, you'll need to revisit that step. And if you then have your checklist where you checked off, I did scoping, and you need to redo it, the checklist is not really the right format for that. However, pick the combination that works best for your team. I recommend having the written out version. I would also include the Visio. I actually also include the checklist, and I just have you pick whichever one you want to use most. But it's really important that whatever you do something that your team will want to use.
That's okay. That's really important. I do understand that it's not an either or kind of situation. We're talking about one playbook, but different formats that exist and can coexist together. Um, Also, when we were talking together, it said it's good to have a written out version as well, because if you want to copy paste commands, that can also be really, really useful. But so, okay, now we have a playbook, we have a final product. It's just a document now. So how do you make this something that people actually use?
Um, Two things. Make sure you get them involved in the creation of it, which already buys that initial investments and that initial buy-in from the teams, and then test, train, update, get them involved, get them excited. Get away from the a tabletop exercise needs to be the one big exercise you do every year that ends up being quite complex and people get lost in it. You can do it a different way as well. And this is a recent tip I received from one of the other sales instructors, where the example that they give, and I'm implementing it now with clients as well, is you do your first test with the core team. You pick that one scenario, you'll test it six different times roughly. You do it with one core team, you make it fun. You make it exciting, you put some memes in there, put some jokes in there. I even made it into a competition. Next time you're gonna make it, find more fitting memes. But just make it lighthearted, right? Get people involved. And then once you have that initial session, it's fun, people are excited, you schedule a second one, and they're looking forward to it. For that second one, you're gonna involve a different team. Make sure that you have an extra stakeholder there. And you repeat that process a few times until all the different stakeholders have been involved once, or a combination of multiple teams have been involved once. And once you've done that, you made sure that the playbook fits for every team. You made sure that they were able to give their input. It works for them. They've seen it before. They were able to modify it. And then you can do that big tabletop exercise. where everybody's involved, but at least they've seen it before, they've tested it before, they've used it before. Now, what we also often see there is that one playbook will become very big. If you want to describe all the steps that all the different teams will take, that will be a very big document. So a lot of companies have given me feedback that they prefer to do different, or that one playbook, split it up in different playbooks for different teams. So each team that's involved has their way of working. It's still tied together because it's based off of the same process, but they usually just make split off documents that then they use for their specific teams, which is perfectly fine because, as I said, you need to do what works best for your company.
I'm really interested when you talk about bringing in other teams, because it's true. If you have a real life scenario of ransomware, realistically, the IT team is not going to be the only one that has to solve the incident or work with it. So you're going to have legal coming in and communications as well need to be involved. So in those mini tabletops, how would you involve those other teams? You mentioned bringing them in. Um, would you bring them in to train it when you build it, when you update it? How much do they need to be involved actually?
So there's different ways to approach this. The first thing would be if you have your development of your playbook, the main team that will be involved will be probably your technical team because they are most often the core responders when an incident happens. But specifically for ransomware as well, there's quite a big impact on business continuity. So once you're making your playbook, once you're making your technical response, make sure to involve those key stakeholders for that business continuity, for legal. The question, do you want to pay? Yes or no? Is it even legal to pay? Make sure that you involve these different teams as well. At creation, not only at testing, but the moment you create it. Once you're testing it, again, I always start with my core team, and then I involve the different teams based on which aspect of the scenario are we testing now. Because for ransomware, from a technical point of view, there's a few key elements that you want to answer. Was there data exfiltration? Yes or no? Because that's very important for the negotiations. But the aspect of negotiating, of business continuity, of disaster recovery, of do we have backups trusted or not, the emphasis, the focus will be way more on these kind of topics than with a different scenario. So based on the scenario that you pick, you should already have an idea on what will be the main efforts here, where should be the main focus, and have those teams or update your core team to involve these different stakeholders as well. I think that would be the best approach, from my opinion.
All right, thanks. That sort of sounds like a tip. So, and this is called the CyberTips webinar. So you see where I'm going with this. Do you have other tips to share that people really need to remember by the end of today?
A few. The first one, I think, is the most basic one. Get started. And if you want to get started, and if you've never done it before, I know everybody keeps asking about the ransomware playbook, but it might not be the best one to get started just because it's a really complex one to do. So just pick a scenario, either the most impactful one or the most common one, get started, get working on it. Follow the initial tips that we've already mentioned, sit together with the people who respond, write out your initial response, map it to a framework, and then get the third party involved. So do something. Everything you do is better than nothing. Even thinking about it is better than doing nothing. And if you already have something, well, go ahead, go open your incident response plan and see when it was last updated. And for the people listening, I invite you to do the same. Go to your SharePoint folder, wherever it starts. Look at your contact details of the people that you were going to call. Are they still working in your company? Do they still hold that position? And if you have a primary contact, well, what if you're going to call them at 4 a.m. on a Saturday? Are they going to pick up? Do they have to pick up? Or is it based on goodwill? Because even though everybody has the best intentions, purely basing it on Google is going to be a bit difficult. So I think that would be the second one. Make sure that you update, you validate what you've already written. And then the third one, make sure it's usable. Make sure you thought of the critical questions. Where is it stored, or who are you going to call? How are you going to call them at what hour? What if it's outside of business hours? And if the decision is we don't have anything outside of business hours, that's fine, as long as you realize it. Well, it's not fine, you'll need to improve it. But the fact that you identified it, that's the important part. Now, to end on a good note as well, because it's a lot of daunting information, the fact that we're here, that we're talking about is that people are listening to this already indicates that people are willing to get started. The next step is, well, just do it. Get started. Try, fail, and try again. I think that's the best tip I can give you on this one.
Thanks. That's these are really useful tips. I like the try, fail, try again. I think it's a pretty good way of looking at cybersecurity. For everybody that's watching, I see a couple questions about examples. You can check out the documentation part. There is a slide about it that you can see for yourselves later. You're also in the resources tabs. We have put all these links. This is time also to let Jeroen catch his breath and take a look at the questions from the audience. If you have any questions, just please post them in the Q&A section of the chat, and we'll, try to answer them live. In the meantime, I have a couple of announcements. There will be more webinars coming up. We have our traditional CTI webinar called the QCTR, and this one will take place, as always, in the afternoon, and that one will be on the 22nd of April. We also have coming up the yearly EU MITRE ATT&CK workshop, and that will be taking place on the 6th of May in Brussels. If you're able to be in Brussels at this time, I would encourage you to sign up to come in to register on site, but it will also be held hybrid, so you can also join online. Just make sure to register quickly either way, because there are specific capacity limitations. And lastly, we have the next CyberTips edition. We already have the date. That's the 25th of June. We do not, however, have the topic yet because we want to hear from you. So write your suggestions in the chat or write them in the survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of today's webinar. That is all I had to share with you. So Jeroen, you can please pick your first question.
All right. In terms of questions, the first one that we have is from Steven Peters asking, well, when you make a playbook, do you start with simulating the incidents and then map it or describe how you're handling it? Or do you start with this is how you should handle and then implement it? I always try to start with how do you respond? So whenever I make a playbook with a client, my first thing would be I make that scenario, I sit down with them, and I just have them walk me through to how would they respond. And then I map that response to the structure. Because I really want to emphasize it's not me telling you need to do it this way. It's you telling me I would do it this way and then modify it to what industry standards are or to make sure that you didn't forget anything. So I really want to emphasize there, from my point of view, and it's also what I feel works best, get a response of how would you respond and map that to the framework, the expected steps, instead of the other way around. And I hope that answers that question. If not, please do let me know. A second question from Antoine Blairon is, can you recommend a generic playbook template to use and adapt to our specific context? Well, the thing is, if you're talking about generic, we're talking about incident response plans because playbooks are scenario-specific ones. However, in the resources, we've shared, I think, quite a lot of resources, to be honest, and a lot of them, and shout out to the CERT Société Générale GitHub page, which is in there as well, which I see is also mentioned in the comments. They have quite a lot of playbook examples available, but be wary of using a generic template to modify it to your environment, because the template will contain tips and tricks or steps that you can't forget, but make sure that it's usable in your environment because everybody's environment is different. And it's quite important that the playbook is tailored to your specific situation.
Great. Maybe a third question before we end.
Yeah, okay. So one interesting one from Badr El-Keleni. How do you balance a playbook being detailed enough to be useful, but flexible enough to adapt to unexpected scenarios? But it's an interesting one. It's also a difficult one because there's no one answer fits all. But the important part there is make sure you have your playbook. Don't go too much in detail in the beginning. Make sure it adapts or it fits your scenario. Don't be too specific and test it. Go through a tabletop, figure out a scenario, and then make a small adaptation on the scenario and just see would this still be relevant. If you can, once you get to that maturity, try to test it in your environment, which ties back to maybe do a purple team. Get those logs and see if that still is relevant to the playbook that you've made. But there's a very high risk with being too specific and therefore missing some aspects, which is why I prefer to do your playbook with steps for that specific scenario. And then optionally, you can go more specific with those work instructions and everything if necessary.
Right. Thanks, Jeroen. I think that was a pretty extensive answer. But just never hesitate to come back to us and say, did that work out with you? We'll be happy to hear more about it. We are now getting to the end of today's webinar. So a big thank you to Jeroen for sharing useful examples and actually actionable tips. Thank you so much for coming. It's definitely been super fun for me.
It was.
And
Thank you
thank
so much for having me.
and thank you all for watching. I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.